If you've been looking for ways to spruce up the top surface of your 3D prints, then you're in the right place. Because in today's video, I'm going to show you how to use the ironing feature in your slicer, as well as how to use different top surface patterns, which can help give your print a more professional look. But before that, really quickly, hi there, I'm Matt, and on this channel I'll be showing you lots of tips and tutorials for improving your 3D printing knowledge and experience. Also, the eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed this in the background, which is the new Snapmaker U1, and I'll be testing and reviewing this on this channel very soon, so stay tuned. But without further ado, let's get into today's video. So first I'm just going to add a generic cube as an object to the build plate to show the different settings on. So then you want to find the ironing setting itself, which can be found in the quality tab. So you scroll all the way down, you can find ironing here. If you can't find it, it'll probably be because you haven't got the advanced features toggled on. So if I turn that off, I now no longer can see ironing, as well as a bunch of other settings that I'm not talking about today. So if in doubt with any of my videos, make sure you have advanced features turned on. And yeah, as I mentioned, ironing is here. So by default, it's not turned on. If you click on the drop down, there are a few different modes available. So there's top surfaces, topmost surface, and all solid layer. They're all pretty self-explanatory, but I'll just go through them quickly. So top surfaces applies ironing to everything that's considered a top surface. So it's not just the very top of the print. If you've got a staircase kind of model, then it'll apply to every single time there's a top surface like that. Whereas on the opposite end, the topmost surface will just be the very top flat surface. In some cases, top surface and topmost surface can be the same. And then all solid layer will apply ironing to every single solid layer. So anything that doesn't have sparse infill applied will have the ironing applied. I've never used this one. I thought it actually sounds kind of useless, but I've seen some comments explain that it can be used for things such as improving transparency of translucent filaments like PLA translucent or PETG translucent, or it can even be used for things such as vases or light boxes. So in the case of vases, it can be used to get a more watertight solid layer. And for light boxes, it can be used to improve the light diffusion of the front panel. Anyway, unless you have those very specific situations, then top surfaces or topmost surface will be the ones you'll use most regularly. So I typically just use top surfaces, and if you turn this on, you can see a bunch of new settings have appeared. So there's the ironing pattern, the speed, the flow, the line spacing, and the ironing inset. There's a few of these I never really bother changing, but I'm sure they do have a use case, I just haven't found one, which is the line spacing and the inset, as well as the ironing pattern, but I'm sure this has a use case too. So by default, this is set to rectilinear. There is also concentric ironing, and I imagine concentric ironing is probably better if you've got a concentric top surface pattern, which I will talk about later when I'm showing you how to change the top surface patterns. But the two main settings which have the largest impact on the quality of the ironing are the ironing speed and flow. So by default, it's set to 30 millimeters per second, and the flow is set to 10%. So what this means is 10% of the flow of filament from the nozzle. Because if you weren't aware, the way that ironing works is the nozzle extrudes a really small amount of filament with a really slow print speed to smooth out the top surface. So higher ironing speed and flow results in faster ironing. I've never found these default ironing settings to be very good. The best way to determine good ironing settings for you to use is to print an ironing calibration model. There are a bunch of these on MakeWorld, but I printed this one, which I'll leave linked in the description below. Different filament types can give different ironing needs. You shouldn't need to print one of these for different colors within the filaments because that would be a lot of effort, but it can happen if there's variations in additives in the filament or variations between batches. Another thing is I wouldn't recommend ironing with silk PLA because this completely dulls the shininess of silk PLA, which defeats the purpose of using it. If you've got a bad top surface to start with, then ironing won't fix that. You'll still have a bad surface afterwards. So it's important to make sure your filament flow rate is dialed in first. Anyway, one of the downsides to ironing is increased print time, especially if you've got a larger flat surface. So just to show you this here, I'm going to turn off the ironing first and slice. So for this model, it'll take 25 minutes. So if I turn the ironing back on with the default ironing settings and reslice, it's now 27 minutes. So because this is quite a small model and the top surface isn't very big, it hasn't added that much in print time. However, in more extreme examples, you can get a much increased print time. So as I mentioned earlier, the best ironing settings I found for PLA Basic is 50 ironing speed with a 30% flow rate. Let's just see how this compares. So as you can see, this has reduced the print time compared to the default ironing settings because there's a higher speed and flow rate, so that makes sense. And you can kind of tell that there's ironing applied because you can see it. The surface here looks smoother. So if I add a second copy, what I can do is go to the Objects tab and turn on ironing selectively for one of the cubes. So I go to the Quality tab here in the Objects tab, I can turn off ironing. Now if I slice this, you can see here, the one on the right with no ironing has the obvious top surface pattern, And then on the left with the ironing, you can see what it's expecting the ironing to end up looking like. Obviously, this slice preview isn't a representation of how it will exactly look in your real-life print, but at least you can tell which one has ironing turned on and which one doesn't. So in addition to that, you can have different ironing settings for each object on a plate. So I could, if I wanted to, have the other one set to the default. So this could be useful if you want to test out different ironing settings on your actual model, not on any calibration models. I just want to quickly debunk something because I've seen some comments from people saying that ironing triples your print time, which is an exaggeration to say the least. So as an extreme example, I've got this huge cube basically taking up the whole build plates. This is like 25 centimeters cubed, and I just want to compare the print time. So without ironing on, this will take 4 hours, 23 minutes to print. If I turn ironing back on with the 50 and 30 speed and flow rate, now it takes 6 hours 30. So yes, that has added 2 hours of print time. Obviously, this is a very extreme example. I don't think anyone would ever be ironing something with a top surface this flat, but it is technically possible. And this has added 2 hours. So it hasn't even doubled the print time. It's added 50% print time. Also, I'll show some comparisons of print with and without ironing turned on, and you can judge for yourself, but I think it is worth using it, even if it does result in a slightly longer print time, because you can get much cleaner surfaces and it just makes the print look better. So to quickly compare, this is a non-ironed print here. You also see, I don't know if you can hear that, but you can tell it's non-ironed. And here's an ironed one, which minus the few scratch marks, because the print's a bit old now, you can see how smooth it is. It's quite reflective. That's how smooth it is. So you can see the difference there with the print quality. So on that topic, one of the downsides of ironing is the increased print time. So if print time is most important to you above everything else, then maybe ironing isn't for you. There is one other considerable downside, which is the increased risk of clogging the nozzle due to the really low flow rate of filament through the nozzle, which can lead to clogs. So not ideal, but I've never actually had a clog from ironing, so it's probably quite rare, but just to make you aware of that fact. But if it does lead to a clog and your nozzle is completely bricked, then they're like £10 to repair, so it's not the end of the world. In my last video, I talked about using variable layer height and fuzzy skin to hide layer lines, so you can combine this with ironing. So if you've got a model which has curved surfaces or just layer lines you want to hide, and also has flat surface on top that you'd like to look more professional, then you can carry out ironing as well. So if you combine these features, you can get really nice looking prints which almost don't look 3D printed. So the other thing I want to show you today is how to change the top surface patterns of your prints, which is another way to improve the aesthetics. So head to the Strength tab, and then under Top and Bottom Shells, the top setting here is Top Surface Pattern, which by default is set to monotonic line, which if you slice the model, you can see this is the monotonic line pattern on the top, which is nothing fancy, but it is the default, and it's fine in most cases. But if you click on the drop-down, you can see there's a bunch of other surface patterns available, and some of them are quite interesting. So concentric, I think this looks quite interesting. The Hilbert curve kind of looks like a brain to me. It's quite nice. So instead of having to check them all or print them individually for your model, again, it's Make World to the rescue, as there's loads of models that compare different top surface patterns. I printed this one, which again, you might not be able to see super clearly, but it just compares all the ones that are there. So concentric, monotonic line, Hilbert curve, Archimedean chords, and octagram spiral. If you're interested, you can print this too in your particular color or filament type. And I'll leave it linked in the description below, of course. The last thing I want to show you is using different top surface patterns for different objects. So like with the ironing, if you have another object on your build plate, you can head to the Objects tab and then to the Strength tab, and you can change the top surface pattern for one of them. So one of them's got Hilbert curve, and you can change the other one to octagram spiral. So now when you slice, you can see that they have different top surface patterns applied. Side point, but I think octagram spiral is my favorite top surface pattern, particularly for large flat surfaces. And an extra tip, it looks great with silk filaments because the shininess of the silk really highlights the spiral. If you're interested, the same patterns are available for the bottom surface too. So here's the bottom surface pattern. If you want, you can change this to a different pattern from the default, which is monotonic line again. So you slice that and you can look underneath. Here's the bottom surface pattern. So now you should be confident in using the ironing feature as well as different top surface patterns to improve the aesthetics of your 3D prints. If you learned something new today, drop a like and a comment on this video. And while you're down there, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of my new videos. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!